Hi everybody. Today I want to talk about roofing, primarily different kinds of roofing materials that we will encounter and then the process by which we would apply those roofing materials. So the primary function of the roofing materials is to keep water out of the house. There can be an incredible amount of water collecting on the roof, and the material needs to be applied in a certain way to keep water out. The most common material that we're going to encounter is asphalt shingles. Asphalt shingles are layers of paper and tar and very tiny little rocks sandwiched all together. And just for clarification, the rocks only go on the final layer. So it's a layer of paper and tar, and then more paper and tar, and then more paper and tar, and then more paper and tar, and then rocks embedded in the tar. And what the rocks do is they actually reflect the sun, prevent UV degradation of the roofing material. We'll see some pictures here in a little bit, but most of the asphalt shingles that we're going to encounter are going to be 3 feet long, 1 foot tall, and they're going to have a 5 and 5/8 exposure. So out of that 1 foot height, okay, we're only going to see 5 and 5/8 of it because there's going to be a shingle that covers half of each shingle, and then so there's 5 and 5/8 there, but then on the ends we're going to leave 5 and 5/8 exposed, and that's going to create the setback for each one of our shingles. Okay, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but we want to step each one of those shingles back, because if we line up a bunch of 3 foot shingles all the way up on the roof, that's going to be a leak all the way down the roof. So if we offset those shingles, water, when it gets between the two shingles, there will be a solid shingle underneath that, and it'll drain away. So the roofing deck, before whatever the covering is going to be covered with some sort of underlayment. If we're talking, most kinds of roofing materials are going to either get felt paper or some sort of synthetic underlayment. If we're doing a torch down roof, that's going to get fiberglass base sheet. More on that later, but at any rate, that underlayment serves a couple different purposes, and we'll talk about those later. Most of the materials we are going to talk about are going to last 20 to 50 years, depending on what you buy, what kind of material you buy. And then with the asphalt shingles, there are different grades of material that you can buy. And usually, if you have the money up front, it usually makes more sense to buy the 50-year shingle versus the 30-year shingle, because the really expensive part of roofing or anything is the labor involved. So if you buy a 50-year shingle and you only have to apply it once, it might make more sense financially in the long run than, having to do the roof twice if you have a 30-year shingle. But some people, are going to pay for one roof, and that's all they're ever going to pay for anyway, so it might not really matter. But when we talk about shingles, when we measure them up to create an estimate, when we order them at the lumber yard, we talk about the materials in squares. How many squares is the roof? And so that represents 100 square feet. So if we have a roof that we're going to do and we came up with 23 squares, then the roofing area is 2,300 square feet. And so I think people get confused sometimes with this, because the squares of the roof is not the same as the footprint, the square footprint of the house. If we're building a 1,500 square foot house, that's because we're looking at a bird's eye view, plan view of a rectangular area. But when we're measuring the roof, we're on a diagonal plane. And so the way we would measure that is we would measure a rectangle at a pitch, measure one side of that. So say that's 40 feet long and it's 22 feet wide. We would multiply those together and get one side of the roof. And then if it's just a gable, we could double that and get the other side of the roof. And you can figure that out also, like just with the plans. If you have a set of plans and you don't want to actually go out to the job site and measure up the roofing material, if you know the width of the house and you know what the overhang is on each side, okay, you can get one dimension. And then if you know the other side, the depth of the house or whatever the case may be, you can determine half of that. Okay, so let's say the front of the house is 30 feet. Half of that, this is kind of some roof framing terminology here, but the run is going to be 15 feet. And then if you know what the pitch is and you get the diagonal, then that's going to be one length of the roof as well. Okay, so it's not going to be 44 by 15. It's going to be 15 is the run on a 5 and 12 pitch or whatever the pitch may be. You would determine the diagonal of that, and then that's how you would measure up that roofing. Okay, but that's maybe a discussion for another time. Wood shingles and shakes used to be the most common roofing material in our area because we had a really steady, plentiful timber supply. And before we kind of get into this too much, I want to be very clear about the difference between these. People use shingles and shakes kind of interchangeably, but they refer to two very different things. Shingles, that's what we have in this picture, are sawn. So they're actually taken to a bandsaw and cut with a saw. Shakes are split. Okay, they both start out as bolts, is what they're called. It looks like a big piece of firewood. And you either take a bolt and you saw a bunch of shingles off, or you take a bolt and you split it into a bunch of pieces and make shakes. So the shakes are going to be thicker, they're going to look rougher, and they're going to kind of vary in thickness. Whereas the shingles, for the most part, are going to be pretty consistent in the thickness. And they're going to be tapered. They're going to be 5/16, 3/8 or something at the butt. The thick part is called the butt. And then they're going to taper down essentially to a feathered edge at the back. Okay. We don't see a whole lot of these anymore. This used to be the cheap option because we had huge timber reserves. It's a very, very expensive option now. And so there's a couple things have happened to make it really expensive. One thing is we cut all the nice trees down for the most part. Okay, and what's left, we don't want to cut them down because there's not very many left. So we're not really cutting quality old growth trees down anymore to make shingles and shakes. So we can get them, but the quality is lesser. Where they used to last 50 years, 60 years, now they're lasting 15, 20 years. So it's a pretty big investment, and they don't really last as long as they used to. The other thing is fire restrictions have kind of added to the cost. All the shingles, if they're going to be used for a roof, need to be coated with a fire retardant. But for the most part, I would say that the biggest thing is just the cost of the material has really gone up, and it doesn't make financial sense to put these on. Traditionally, these were nailed over skip sheathing. Like when we build our house, we're going to put a plywood deck on top of the trusses. But traditionally, framers would nail 1x6 or 1x8 boards to the trusses and then leave an 1.5 to 2-inch gap between each board. So there would essentially be like a ladder on the roof. And when I've torn off shake roofs or shingle roofs or something like that, and there's skip sheathing underneath it, it's really nice for the tear off. You can kind of hook your feet in there and you can stand up there and work. And it also had the benefit of drying out the backs of the shingles. So that's another thing that contributed to the extended life of the shingles, is that they got wet. Okay, it was a piece of wood on a roof. It got wet. It soaked up a bunch of moisture. But with that skip sheathing, the backs of the shingles were exposed, and so there was lots of air blowing against the backs of those shingles, and it contributed to the drying potential of those shingles. Tile roofing, this is what we would call tile roofing. It's like terracotta. Sometimes there's cement tiles. And this is a slate roofing. Slate is a stone that is quarried, and I guess similar to the way they would make like shakes or shingles, it comes from a big rock and they saw or split it off of a big rock and turn it into individual tiles. They usually have holes pre-drilled in the top, and you would like hand nail through those slate tiles. Slate tiles, terracotta roofing tiles can last indefinitely. They tend to not get broken down in the sun, which is kind of the doom of most other roofing materials. And they don't get, there's not going to have like a mushroom decaying them or termites eating them or anything like that. So they could theoretically last forever, but the problem is they're so brittle. And so repairs become kind of a really big deal. If a tree branch falls on a slate roof or a terracotta tile roof and it breaks, then that's where you're going to have leaks. Okay, whereas a piece of wood or an asphalt shingle, if something fell on it or somebody was walking all over it, it wouldn't really matter. Okay, these materials are so hard that they become brittle, and that is the problem with them. Eventually, if they get too broken up, they have to come off. But the stories I've heard, and I will just say that we don't see a lot of slate roofs around here. I think on the East Coast they're more popular, and then the people that I've worked with that have done these slate tear-offs, they said that it was 300-400-year-old roof that they had to tear it off, and then they were very dangerous. It's very dangerous to tear these things off because it's so heavy. And so I would say there's also like structural and framing considerations that need to be taken into account also if you're going to apply one of these roofs to your building, because the material is so heavy, and over time it could cause a tremendous strain on the roof. Torch down or roll roofing. This is something that we're going to have to use for low pitched roofs. So most roofing materials, the minimum slope is a 2.5 and 12 pitch, and that's pretty flat. The problem is once we get down that low or shallower than that, water doesn't really shed. Water just kind of sits on the roof. Even though it's got a pitch, water will still pool on a roof like that. And so we need to have a seamless roofing material. We can't have any sort of seams or joints or anything like that, because the water will find its way into those joints. So these materials are similar to the felt paper I was talking about, where it's layers of paper and tar and paper and tar and paper and tar with rocks on the top to give the material some UV protection. And so there's this layer of tar on the bottom here that gets heated up with a torch, and I should have mentioned this first. This is the base sheet. Instead of felt paper or some sort of synthetic underlayment, we would use base sheet with this material, fiberglass base sheet, and it is fireproof. Okay, if we tried to apply torch down roofing to felt paper, we would set the felt paper on fire. So we're heating this up with a torch. This material is melting into this base sheet. The base sheet is the only thing holding this material on the roof. We don't nail this down to the roof or anything, this torch down. The base sheet's nailed down to the roof deck. The torch down gets melted with the torch into the base sheet, and that's what's keeping this thing on the roof. You can do a double layer of this material. So let me start out by saying this material generally lasts about 15 years. That's the life expectancy for torch down roofing. You can do a double layer of it, and the way it would work is you would put down a roll of torch down called smooth. It doesn't have these rocks in it. You would put down a layer of smooth, and then you would come back with a layer of the granulated over that and melt everything together. And that's how you would kind of get a 30-year roof out of this thing. These are prone to leaks. I thought this was going away because when I was roofing, everybody hated flat roofs. People were tearing flat roofs off. You have to re-roof the thing every 15 years. There's water sitting on it all the time. You know, there was a lot of problems with leaks. And then people didn't like the looks of it either. But times have changed now, and everybody likes flat roofs again. And so we're back to doing a lot of torch down roofs. And I would just say that it's dangerous, it's hot, people get burned, and then the other thing is people set houses on fire. So you're supposed to do, I think it's a 1-hour fire watch after you're done doing the torch down to make sure that you didn't like catch something on fire and then drive away and the house burns down.